It was the ultimate tale of triumph over adversity, the story of a mother who, after losing her home and with her terminally ill husband by her side, embarked on an epic 630-mile walk along England's coastline. Her memoir, The Salt Path, became a global sensation, a book club phenomenon that sold over 2 million copies and inspired countless people to believe in the power of resilience. It was so powerful, it's now being turned into a Hollywood film starring Gillian Anderson. But what if the very foundation of this unflinchingly honest epic was beginning to crack? What if the story that captivated millions was not the whole truth? An explosive investigation has just turned this tale of hope on its head, revealing that the author and her husband were not who they claimed to be, that the circumstances of their homelessness were not as depicted, and that while they were supposedly destitute, they owned a property in France all along. Today, we are diving deep into the stunning scandal surrounding the author Raynor Winn. We will uncover the shocking allegations that have left her fans feeling utterly betrayed, from accusations of embezzlement to a secret French hideaway. And, for the first time, we will hear the story through the eyes of a journalist who met Winn just before the controversy exploded, and whose personal account raises even more unsettling questions about what was real and what was simply part of the story. Was this an inspirational memoir or a masterfully crafted deception? Let's find out. To understand the magnitude of the fallout, you first have to understand the phenomenon of the salt path. Published in 2018, Raynor Winn's book was more than just a travelogue. It was a testament to the human spirit, a Bible for anyone feeling lost in the modern world. It told the story of Raynor and her husband, Moth, who, in their 50s, received two devastating blows at once. They lost a court case against a friend over a bad business deal, which resulted in the loss of their beloved Welsh farm, rendering them homeless. At the very same time, Moth was diagnosed with corticobasal degeneration, or CBD, a rare and fatal neurological condition with a life expectancy of just 6 to 8 years. It was a perfect storm of tragedy. With nothing left but the rucksacks on their backs and a few pounds to their name, they made a desperate, spontaneous decision to walk the Southwest Coast Path, a grueling 630-mile trek from Somerset to Dorset. The book was a raw, emotional account of their journey, battling homelessness, prejudice, physical agony, and despair, all while finding a strange sense of healing in nature. It became an instant Sunday Times bestseller. It was shortlisted for major awards, and it shifted over 2 million copies worldwide. It wasn't just a book, it became a movement. People connected with its message of anti-consumerism, of finding freedom in dispossession. It was a story people needed to believe in. It offered hope that even in our darkest moments, we can find a path forward. The story was so compelling that a film adaptation was announced, with Gillian Anderson set to play Raynor and Jason Isaacs as Moth. Raynor Winn wasn't just an author, she was a symbol of survival. But then, an investigation by the Observer newspaper began to pull at the threads of this perfect narrative, and the entire tapestry started to unravel in the most public and humiliating way imaginable. The report revealed a series of bombshells that struck at the very heart of Winn's story. First, the names. The couple weren't Raynor Winn and Moth. They were, in fact, Sally and Tim Walker. While using a pseudonym isn't a crime, especially for a memoirist, it was the first hint that the public persona might be a carefully constructed character different from the private reality. But the revelations went much, much deeper. The investigation found that Sally Walker, the woman the world knew as Raynor Winn, had been questioned by police after a former boss accused her of embezzling £64,000. This allegation casts a jarring shadow over the book's narrative of simple, honest folk wronged by the world. Then came the story of their home. The memoir paints a picture of a couple who lost everything due to a bad business deal with a friend, the innocent victims of a financial betrayal that left them on the street. However, the report alleged that the circumstances were not as they had depicted, suggesting a far more complex financial history. But the most damning allegation, the one that directly contradicted the core premise of homelessness that defined the Salt Path, was this. The report found that since 2007, the couple have owned a property near Bordeaux in France. While readers pictured them shivering in a flimsy tent, battling the elements with only each other for warmth, the reality may have included a French retreat waiting for them. The idea that this couple, portrayed as destitute, had a second property in another country sent shockwaves through the literary world and, most importantly, through their legions of loyal fans. The fallout was immediate and brutal. Winn, or Walker, has vehemently denied many of the claims, describing the investigation as grotesquely unfair, highly misleading, and seeks to systematically pick apart my life. The most heartbreaking claim for her, she added, was the suggestion that Moth made up his illness. Yet, the damage was done. The CBD charity they had fundraised for dropped them. The owner of a cider farm, who had been so moved by the salt path that he graciously invited the couple to live with him, came forward to say he now feels gaslit, a powerful word suggesting his kindness was manipulated. Winn's fourth book, On Winter Hill, which was due this autumn, has been put on ice. Her live tour dates have been canceled. Social media erupted with a sense of profound betrayal from readers who had invested so much emotion into this story, some of whom had even uprooted their own lives, inspired by what they now feared was a narrative built on false pretenses. It is a story that has left millions of readers feeling completely duped. If you've ever been captivated by a story only to find out it might not be true, hit that like button. The feeling of betrayal is powerful, and we're now going to dig into a perspective that makes this even more complex. Adding a fascinating new layer to this saga is the personal account of a journalist who interviewed Winn 2 Julys ago, just before the release of her third book. To get the story, she boarded a train to the small Cornish town of Lostwithiel on a hot Friday afternoon. Winn herself collected the journalist from the station. The meeting took place not at Winn's home, but at the bustling Duchy of Cornwall nursery, a public space filled with music and chatter, an odd choice for an intimate conversation. And right away, the journalist felt a strange disconnect. She wrote, "The woman whose emotional turmoil had poured across her pages was far more reserved in person. The rawness I had expected from someone who had battled so much unbelievable misfortune was absent." Instead of sharing new insights or deeper reflections, Winn seemed to stick to a script, repeating anecdotes that were already in her books. It was less of a conversation and more of a recitation. The journalist felt that our encounter had been somehow unsatisfying, that everything beyond what she had already written was somehow off limits. This feeling of a carefully managed narrative, of a performance, now seems eerily prescient. But it was the topic of Moth, her husband, that was most on the journalist's mind. His story was, in many ways, even more miraculous than Raynor's. Diagnosed a decade earlier with a disease that typically kills within 6 to 8 years in a state of progressive deterioration, he had not only survived, but had undertaken months-long walks that would test the fittest of people. The journalist had been looking forward to meeting this man who had so spectacularly defied the odds. But it wasn't to be. Just ahead of the interview, the plans changed. The meeting location was shifted from their home to the nursery for a solo interview with Winn. The photo shoot with both of them was also postponed. At the time, the journalist considered the grim possibilities. Given the brutal lows of his condition, the agony, bowel problems, memory slips, and despair, she wondered if living out in the open had triggered a decline that the couple was unwilling to share publicly. A perfectly reasonable assumption. And yet, the images that did eventually emerge told a different story. Photos taken of Moth showed him looking well. In pictures taken alongside the actor Jason Isaacs around the time of the film's promotion, he appeared, as the journalist put it, more dashing perhaps than the Hollywood actor enlisted to play him. The journalist has since been asked the same question over and over. Did she suspect back then that something was amiss? Her answer is refreshingly honest. Plainly, no. As she points out, medical miracles, though rare, do happen. Some people are naturally reserved in interviews, and plans do change. But now, with the benefit of hindsight and the shocking revelations from the investigation, These small, unsatisfying details from that summer afternoon take on a new, troubling significance. The guarded interview, the absent husband, the miraculous health. They no longer look like isolated incidents, but potential pieces of a much larger, more complicated puzzle. So where does this leave the legacy of the Salt Path? The story is now trapped in a fog of ambiguity, a place memoirists should dread. Winn's publisher is, for now, sticking by her, likely weighing the 2 million sales against the PR nightmare. But the trust of her readers is another matter entirely. Can they ever really trust her again? The situation forces us to confront difficult questions about the very nature of memoirs in our curated age. How much of a story needs to be factually accurate for its emotional truth to remain valid? Raynor Winn maintains that the story is entirely real to them, suggesting a subjective truth that might not align with objective facts. It raises the question of whether this was a calculated deception or a story that, through its telling and retelling, became a reality in the minds of its authors, blurring the lines between memory and myth. The public's anger is understandable. People feel duped because the story's power came from its perceived authenticity. The idea of two people with absolutely nothing walking against the world is a powerful modern fable. The idea of two people with a safety net in France walking a famous trail is a holiday, a story of privileged escapism, not desperate survival. This story forces us to ask difficult questions about truth, storytelling, and what we choose to believe. If you want more deep dives into the stories behind the headlines, make sure you're subscribed and have notifications turned on so you don't miss our next investigation. The core of the issue remains. The journalist who met Winn concluded her reflection by stating that while she understands the anger, she also feels for the Winns, that their story, which remains entirely real to them, has been so publicly pulled apart. This captures the dilemma perfectly.
It is a human drama with no easy answers, played out on a national stage. In the end, the path Raynor Winn and her husband walked is now littered with questions. The Salt Path may have led them to fame and fortune, but it has also led them, and their millions of readers, into a wilderness of doubt.
Whether they can find their way out is another story entirely.